Hi folks, Florida Man here, and today I'm bringing you an after-action report on a PDT SuperPastis21 game. This time it's Game 1C. Hello, Latanst.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be chatting with you and doing this after-action report with you. Which country were you in this game?
I was England.
Okay. Why don't you tell me how you started out, and then we'll go and see how the order is processed.
Yeah. Games start off fairly in a standard way, exchanging messages with various people around. But France and Germany were very quick to propose a Western triple. And we got along fairly well. And one thing led to another, and we cemented it pretty much before any moves were made.
Well, I think that's kind of fortunate. I mean, as England, I kind of like the Western triple.
It's not a bad place to be. I think it's good for all three countries if you can develop a level of trust and coordination. But it worked out very well for us and badly for Russia, unfortunately. So Russia, for various reasons, was late to the conversation due to real life, I believe, and was a very friendly player. At some point, I'd like to have their take on how the game proceeded. But unfortunately, he was shut out because we had already made the decision by the time he came onto the scene.
And so what was the initial plan then?
The initial plan was standard Western triple.
Okay.
And so should have been England going across the north and then down the eastern side of the map. Germany extending, or being primarily an army power, and going into the Balkans and extending from there, and then France being a naval power, going east through the Mediterranean, and we'd all meet up in Turkey. But because the game was working under a clock, that had to be changed a little bit halfway through.
So these Spring 1901 orders, did the members of the Western Triple all do as you expected them to do?
Yeah. We ended up compromising quite a bit, mostly because of geography, which is not how I would have played long term, and we had some conversations about that. But France was very reasonable and agreed that we would all limit ourselves to two builds the first year, which meant that I had to go into either Belgium or Denmark.
Interesting. That so I guess the agreement was that you were going to get Belgium then, since I see Germany already putting a unit into Denmark.
Yep. And long term, my preference would have been, and we discussed it several times, to trade Denmark for Sweden. Because I think for a Western triple, that just makes a lot more sense.
I think that's a very natural switch for you, yes.
Yeah. And Germany at the beginning was not entirely on board, I guess I'll say, that I could be trusted, or that France could be trusted. I think we proved that by about the third year. But he was a little skittish on some of the conversations at the beginning, and thought that we were going to strap him, which is something I don't do.
As Germany, I think in a Western triple, I'd always be very skittish.
Yeah.
Because I think if one person's going to get sandwiched, it's usually Germany in this alliance.
It is, and it's one of the hardest things to overcome, I find, in this game. I've been playing for decades, actually, and I've only come onto the internet version in the last 4 or 5 years, I guess. And I am much more of I think by personal history and by my business background and all that, I tend to be much more aiming for compromise in this game. I'm changing that over time. But I think oftentimes there's too much of an emphasis, especially in the computer version of the game, on stabbing and lying. And I don't really think it needs to be played as a liar's game necessarily. I think you can do a lot with just the manipulation and misdirection. Okay. So, but I think that psychology takes hold in many players' minds, and they're very, very quick to stab or to expect to be stabbed.
Oh, I think I like this somewhat different philosophy. Maybe you can get it more into how this affected this game as we go on then.
Yeah, it was a very big factor with the people near me at the beginning. Was an ongoing factor in conversations with Russia, and to a lesser degree with Italy. But Italy ended up being exited from the game fairly quickly, unfortunately.
Oh, all right then. I guess we'll see how that proceeded.
Yep.
going to the fall, I see that things are proceeding in a pretty standard way for your Western Triple, I think. Although Russia did something that, shows that Russia already knew that he wasn't getting Sweden, which is interesting.
Russia, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, do you know if Germany told Russia that they weren't going to get Sweden, or?
Uh, Germany was doing a very good job at facing down Russia at that point. I had a very good relationship with Russia. Germany had a less good relationship with Russia. But Russia was definitely wanting in on the relationship, and in particular wanted to have a good relationship with England. Like I say, they were shut out of that. So I was playing a very delicate dance with Russia where I wouldn't lie to them because I don't like to lie in the game, as I said before. But I was making sure that my messages were either non-committal or open to interpretation, which I could then justify my actions afterwards. So the move into Sweden was basically agreed among the Triple, but then it did put us into that position of what to do with Sweden versus Belgium long term. And as we'll see later, because Germany then built a fleet which sort of sandwiched them into Scandinavia, which was not the place that I would have wanted them to be ultimately.
No, I mean, in a Triple, like, Germany getting a second fleet is really not necessary or desirable at all.
Exactly. Right. Long term, especially because this game was under a deadline, which I think had a very big impact on everybody's moves, especially at the end. I personally always pressed for a very large DMZ among the three Western powers, which I was willing to give up any claim for the North Sea in exchange for a demilitarized continental coast. So that all of our, ultimately what I like in a Western Triple is to have all of the units going against the enemy as much as possible.
Yes, that's the most efficient thing.
Yeah, which also gives more security to the members of the Triple. So they don't have the worry of somebody going into Munich or somebody going into Paris or a fleet coming into Edinburgh or something like that unexpectedly. So
after this, relatively successful 1901, and after builds, what's the conversation looking like between the members of the Triple?
At that point, we were still building a sense of trust, I guess. And I was doing my best to manipulate them in the directions that I wanted them to go, which was the success of the Triple, quite honestly. At that point, at no point during the game did I have any visions of soloing, which I think is one of the weaknesses of the scoring system for a tournament. I think there's a positive motivation built in for draws during most of these tournaments because of the scoring that's employed.
Huh. That's it.
I actually like the scoring system for the tournaments more than I like the official scoring system. I think the scoring system itself puts in too much disincentive to compromise. And there's actually very little reward, no reward, I think, for somebody coming in a strong second. For example, if the two powers are pushing for a two-way draw, or they say they are, and then one screws the other at the very end, you could lose having 15 centers and have a negative score as a result, which I think there should be some sort of compensation for your final position.
Yeah, I definitely understand that point. I mean,
Yep.
I think that's a pretty strong. I think you have a good argument there.
Yep. So anyway, it was a matter of that. There was conversations with some of the other powers. Turkey was the big mystery throughout the game. And I think it was only at the very end, and we'll get to that eventually, that they came on side with the other three powers. But Turkey was playing their own game. Italy and Austria, Italy I think assumed that Austria was on board with a two-party alliance there. But they were very quickly screwed on that point. And at the same time, I was working with Russia trying to pretend, without necessarily promising, that all would be well, that I had no ambitions in Russia itself as England.
All right. We'll see how that plays out this spring, I suppose.
Yep.
where your moves, just like your posture earlier, your moves are just strongly suggestive of a Western triple, and you're going after Russia.
Pretty much, yeah. So at this point, Russia was accusing us of being in a Western triple, as were several other people on the board. So, it's hard to hide these things for more than a year or so. And you can only make so many excuses. But at that point, as you see, Germany had built the Second Fleet, which was putting some question marks in my own mind. Can Germany be trusted? And France was also very concerned about some of the German conversations. On the other hand, France was the less communicative of our three members of the alliance, and that was worrying Germany to a certain point, that they weren't getting enough messages out of Paris.
Interesting. What kind of stuff was Germany saying?
Germany was doing a pretty good job at that point of trying to, I think, plant seeds of doubt, as well as be honest in their own concerns. But at this point, he still wasn't totally comfortable that England could be trusted. And, of course, didn't really, even though he had approved it, didn't like the fact that Germany was sitting with a fleet in Belgium, even though I was already discussing trading Sweden for Belgium, which ultimately would have been his best bet, I think, especially if he was going to turn on France eventually, which he ultimately did not do. But he was very tempted halfway through the game. With France, it was more pressure of, I think France may be a little less experienced in the game. And France could be, as a result, not to be rude, a little bit more manipulated in what moves they need to make. But I was very strong from the very beginning that France should be a naval power, that they should be concentrating on the Mediterranean, while Germany took care of the land units, which was why we really slapped them down on not building the Second Fleet, because it was against what logic and what the strategy should be.
Yeah.
So as you see at this move, France was up to 3 fleets and was beginning to move aggressively against Italy, which had them crying in a very, very loud way for protection, because at this point they were beginning to not trust Austria.
Yeah. Austria's moves here do not look very trustworthy.
No. So Austria was being aggressive. Everyone suspected that they were working with Russia because of the moves up to this point, and I think that was probably true. But Austria ultimately, I think, was working for Austria.
That's not a bad stance to take as Austria.
Yep. So as you see, Germany was moving a little bit too far to the west. So the conversation from France and myself was reminding them that their duty was to go against Austria. So I think Austria was also working Germany to a fairly good extent, because we had several years where Germany was really not making moves that were threatening to the Eastern powers, which is where we needed them to be.
Yeah, I can see that. And with this German army sitting here in Ruhr, that's absolutely not going to be any use against any of the Eastern powers within this year, and possibly not even next year.
Yeah, if this was a non-tournament game, I think the Western Triple would have fallen apart at that point.
Interesting.
Yep. So, and again, Russia was doing its best to find friends, I think. Thought that Austria might be a friend, but was having some doubts. Turkey was being Turkey and playing its own game at that point, being very mysterious, and was starting to realize that England wasn't necessarily going to turn on the Western Triple.
Very unfortunate that England seems likely to be loyal to Western Triple.
Yep. Well, that's me, I think.
Yes.
Like I say, I don't like to lie in this game, and I don't think it's necessary. So I try, in this particular game, I was fairly, because it was suggested by France and by Germany, the Western Triple, I did sign on to it because the logic was there. But in normal games, I try not to promise anything so that I can't be accused of lying later. So.
Well, I understand that point of view. I think that's usually pretty reasonable to try to minimize the need for deception.
Yep. So I'm old enough, I've been doing enough in real life that I'm pretty good with misdirection, I think. Living in Japan helps with that as well.
Huh, that's interesting.
yeah, it's sort of a segue, but I find that the Japanese, by philosophy and by personality, they don't understand that an unstated statement can be a lie. That allowing someone to believe something is a lie, which I think we Westerners often see as much more of a black and white situation.
Yes. I think
Whereas the Japanese say, if you don't actually say something, it's not a lie.
that is kind of interesting. That does sound like a big cultural difference.
Well, when you've lived for a couple thousand years with the fear of your boss cutting off your head, literally, it's best to keep your true thoughts to yourself. In fact, at one point, I think during this game, in the conversations, because I was trying to keep the conversation going with Russia and keep him distracted, so I was throwing a lot of Japanese wisdom at him, just to keep the conversation going without actually promising anything. So I think I even explained the Japanese concept of honne, and maybe even tatemaya at that point, which are two actual Japanese concepts. Honne they're both very important for social interaction in Japan.
Interesting.
Honne is your true feeling, which very seldom turns into words. And tatemaya is the face that you put out to the public. And so at this point in the game, it was, with Russia especially, it was much more tatemaya. I was like putting forth a position, which was not necessarily my heartfelt position.
Interesting. Very, very interesting stuff, I think. Well, let's go fall. And what's happening here? I'm seeing in your neck of the woods there are a bunch of red lines. So I'm guessing you expected to move into Sweden.
Yes, that's right. You remind me. That was where everything got very, very dangerous. And I was trying to find this in my notes before, but I couldn't find it as a good reminder. But I see it now in this map very clearly. Germany had implied that we would be trading Sweden and Belgium at that point.
Implied it?
Well, it led me to believe it, but didn't follow through necessarily.
Wow.
So we almost fell apart at that point, and I used this as a part of my strategy with Russia as well, to show that Germany could not be trusted at this. And of course, he wanted into Sweden himself, which I was going to allow as England. But France really came forward at that point, and that was one reason there was a move to Burgundy. He suspected this, and this is where we really piled onto Germany and forced him to become a team player for the rest of the game.
Wow, excellent.
And the Germans apologized for not doing what they agreed in Sweden. And so there's a lot of mea culpas going around at that point.
Wonderful. I mean, if you can use peer pressure to change the direction of the German foreign policy.
Well, it's it's all people behind these things, as you know very well, and you try to get as much insight as you can into the personality as well as to the tactician that's in front of you. And so France was the weaker power, needed more guidance. Germany was a more nervous power, but once they sinned, it was much easier to play the sin against them.
Interesting.
Yep, and at this point, the Russian build in the north was something I could use against Russia, because I didn't want them up there at all. And that was also a manipulation from Germany. They later admitted that Germany had been playing Russia and potentially wanted the build to be in the south coast of St. Petersburg. They wanted to avoid the south coast. And they wanted the north coast in case things turned bad with England at that point.
That makes a lot of sense to me. As Germany, I'm always very skeptical of the Western Triple as an alliance idea.
Yeah.
So makes a bit of sense to me that the German player is a bit nervous about it.
Yep. No, perfectly logical and reasonable, and something that had to be resisted as England, obviously. And at this point, you also have Turkey into the Ionian, which got everyone's attention.
Yes. And
So
Italy
what
was
is Turkey doing? We were saying to ourselves. And Austria had already moved into Venice at that point. So there were suspicions that Turkey and Austria were working together. There were suspicions that Russia and Austria were working together. There are also suspicions that Turkey and Russia were working together. And the Western Triple was fairly much assumed around the board, but there were some questions raised, which left the question of whither poor Italy. And Italy was desperately sending messages to everybody, be my friend.
Italy is in rather desperate trouble.
Yeah, he is. You got the French in the Mediterranean, you've got the Turks in the Ionian, and Austria already sitting in Venice. They were not a happy camper.
Italy says, "What have I done to deserve this?"
Yeah, you will see that they have a very good and almost successful response to it, but no, they were getting very desperate at that point.
What a pity. Poor Italy didn't even get off the ground.
He seemed like a nice guy, but you gotta play the hand that you're dealt.
That's what they say.
Yep.
All right. In the spring, I suppose we are finally seeing the execution of the Western Triple begin to take full flower. Germany is now moving south and east, and France gets to get out of Burgundy and gets into Tunis. Of course, Italy continues to disintegrate. And what else is happening behind the scenes here that I'm not aware of?
Once we had Germany apologetic for the Sweden snafu, he was much more compliant for the rest of the game. And so we had pretty much demanded they move into Tyrolia in order to help France with the Mediterranean strategy. We were starting to talk about who would ultimately get Venice out of that, because that's always one of the keys. Is that a coastal province or is it an inland province? When you have a German army versus a French navy, I find. And we never got as far as resolving the issue, as you'll see here in a little bit. So France was at this point starting to look good. We had pretty much decided that Italy was about to disappear. And the question then was, how can we get enough Russian cooperation to decapitate Austria before it's too late? So we were all starting to worry about Austria. And of course, the questions remained, what are the Turks doing? Because there they are in Naples.
Oh, yeah, with French support.
Yep. So that was a very clever move on France's part.
I think so.
Which they regretted ultimately, but we thought it was clever at the time.
It seems clever to me. There's a fleet in Naples that will not have any support for remaining there. Italy is weakened, and Austria's units are surrounding the Italian peninsula. So that Turkish fleet might end up being like an extra French unit, depending on what the posture of Austria and Turkey is relative to each other.
Yeah. So I was making soft cooing noises to Russia at this point, as England, while at the same time trying to get Austria and Turkey to be more aggressively anti-Russian.
Oh, poor Russia.
Yeah, because you see this nice little practically demilitarized zone there in around the Carpathians, which was not going to result in any war very quickly, I didn't think.
I think your instincts on that seem correct to me as well.
Yep.
So let's see how that works. Still no one from the east really attacking Russia here, but Germany steadily beginning to move east. Sorry?
Yeah. And no, go ahead.
Getting into some Austrian centers with you guys' help.
At this point, Italy was starting to play a build anywhere sort of game, which I like, but most of the game is not build anywhere rules, so you have to be very careful about your homeland. And the interesting one that I was more involved in was the destruction of the southern Russian fleet in the north, which, as I recall, was an agreed with Russia. I may be wrong on it, but that's my memory of it. That we sort of convinced him to concentrate on his southern war because of the aggression from the Austrians and the Turks, and that even if St. Petersburg fell, which it probably wasn't going to happen, I was maintaining, but even if it fell, he would have the safety of Moscow, because as everyone knows, once you get into St. Petersburg, it's very hard to move south.
Do you think there's any chance Russia actually believed St. Pete wasn't going to fall?
At this point, he was accusing me of lying, and because I'd never said that it wouldn't happen, literally, I wasn't lying.
And so you were trying to explain to him the very subtle distinction.
Yes. And that I was under, because I had obligations with France and Germany, that I had to at least keep the pretense of pulling my weight in the Western Triple.
And I'm sure he was very sympathetic to your concerns and your need to continue putting on a show of fighting him.
He was very nice about it, but
Wow.
once the English have an army in Finland and a fleet in the Barents, it's pretty clear what direction they're going to go.
Yes, I think you're right.
Because there's no place else to go without declaring war on Germany or on France.
Yeah. I mean, Russia's just in that unfortunate position of being the thing that's in your way.
Exactly. They're the next domino to fall. So at this point, France is feeling pretty good about itself, with Tunis falling. The success, there's the attack on, I believe it's an attack on Rome, which fell to Austria. But they were still feeling very, very good about their position as the naval power controlling the Mediterranean. And at that point, they were.
Yeah, that does. They certainly are equal to the combined force of Austria and Turkey navally, so I certainly can see why they'd feel pretty secure and strong.
Yeah. But the Austrian move into the Ionian was pretty bold, and making us much more convinced that maybe Austria and Turkey were working together.
Yes, it does look like that to me. I mean, here Turkey actually supports Austria into Rome.
Yeah.
So if they were not working together, Austria would not get to get a single new center and would go down to 4.
Yep.
Or maybe even 3 if Turkey just took Greece, which Turkey might have been able to if Turkey maybe got France to cut support from the Ionian or something.
Yeah.
But it's looking like Austria and Turkey have decided to unite given the obvious and catastrophic threat that the Western Triple presents.
Yes. The other problem at this point in the game was it was very hard communicating with Turkey. And almost as hard communicating with Austria. So, whereas you had a very, very chatty, we were on opposite sides of the world, but I would have 2 to 3 messages from Russia a day.
Well, in fairness, for you, Russia is actually your next door neighbor, whereas Austria and Turkey might reasonably think that England has very little to say to them.
Yeah.
But that is interesting.
Yeah, and because Turkey at this point is looking questionable.
Questionable in what sense?
In as much as they've got the Italians sitting in Venice and Trieste both. This little sliver of territory with both Budapest and Serbia not being protected. And this army down in Apulia, which is long-term probably going to be useful to them, but short-term is not helping them with their homeland, especially with the Germans sitting in Tyrolia.
Yeah, Austria does look like they're in a bit of trouble.
Yep. So I would have thought they'd be a little bit more communicative at that point. They were trying to pull the Germans as much as possible.
Well,
from the beginning of the game. Yeah.
Especially considering the Germans seemed like the weak link in your alliance.
Yeah. So we were pushing them very, very hard to fight with Austria and stay in communication with Austria. Just to get them off of, take them away from being any threat to ourselves.
Interesting. And so, what happens here in the spring? I see things are going pretty well for you still. You're getting to St. Pete. It's pretty normal central or Western Triple progress for you.
Yeah.
Germany has all of his units on the front lines now, except for one army. All of his units on the front lines with Austria and Russia now. But there's a whole lot going on in the center here. What's your insight into that?
This was a big mystery. What is going on in the south? And we had a lot of conversation about trying to figure it all out because it was not making any sense. Russia, at least, was saying that he didn't know what was going on. France was clueless. Obviously, you've got the Turks turning on the Austrians at this point, and Italy still being in the wrong place. And they're going to do something interesting here in a little bit, which I'm going to be interested to see because I can't quite remember how they got to where they ended up being. But it was complete mayhem as far as we could see. And of course, I had moved into St. Petersburg at this point as well, so which was easily predicted. But I was starting to wonder, what do I do now? Especially if I can't get Sweden and Belgium to trade. At this point, we'd given up on trading Sweden and Belgium because of the little mess up that we'd had a year earlier, where Germany didn't deliver. So I was really just sitting on Germany and France saying, do your jobs, do your jobs, do your jobs. And this is our chance now because there's a lot of mayhem in the south. So France, sail east as quickly as you can.
Yeah, it's this is pretty interesting. I mean, with Turkey moving on Austria and Austria also losing ground to France, it feels like a complete victory for the Western Triple is incoming here.
It was looking very good at this point.
Yeah, and with Turkey also being on board, of course.
Right. And again, who is Turkey actually loyal to, other than Turkey? So
I think it's just Turkey. That's my guess here.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, this fall.
How did Italy get to Marseille?
It looks like Italy retreated forward from Venice to Piedmont.
That's what they did. Yep.
And then moved to Marseille.
Yeah, that's because we don't see the end map there. Yeah, this was a brilliant move by Italy, and because it was a knife right in the middle of the Western Triple at that point.
Yeah, it's behind the lines, and you guys are going to have to devote extra resources to dealing with that.
Yeah, so this is where France got very wobbly. They saw that they were in danger in Spain and potentially farther north, and that even if Italy wasn't going to be able to build necessarily, that they could do a lot of damage in the meantime.
Yeah.
So agreement was made to have Germany protect France.
That makes a lot of sense. If I were in the Western Triple at this point, what I would think here is, as much as we may have distrusted Germany earlier, I'd like Munich to move into Burgundy, because then we can destroy the army in Marseille instead of just tolerating it.
Exactly. And at this point, the conversation was also including the 1909 deadline.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a major factor in everybody's thinking throughout this war.
Yeah, this game has been flying by flying by very quickly, but I imagine it's probably approaching the end sometime in the next couple of years.
We were starting to think endgame.
Yeah.
And I think if there had not been an artificial deadline, that this war would have changed directions several times by this point. I think the Western Triple might have disintegrated. Mm-hmm. And we really stuck with it because there was nothing else to do with no time left, except embrace Russia, which at this point was not looking that strong.
Russia still has 4 centers. It's I think Russia seems at this point like, if I had to gamble, I'd say Russia's much more likely to survive the game than Austria.
That was the hope.
I imagine.
Especially as England. You know, I can tolerate Russian armies more than I can tolerate their fleets, generally.
That's very rational, yeah.
But then it was going to be, if the war had not had the deadline, England's was, and I was actually thinking, where do I go now? How do I grow? And still keep my promises, which I had foolishly made earlier in the game. So
sounds to me like you're either going to have to start looking at getting another army into Scandinavia to take Moscow, or you're going to have to start grabbing some of those juicy, lightly defended German dots.
Yep. At this point, well, in the next move or so, Italy's move into Marseille saved me from breaking the alliance.
Oh,
So,
well, that's wonderful, I suppose.
yep. So it gave me an excuse to find new places to where it would have eventually grown into if the game had gone on longer. So at this point, I'm safely in St. Petersburg. I've got no threat since there's only one unit on my border.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a matter of, can we weaken Russia enough that it can continue growing into Russia and do the traditional go south down the eastern borders of the map.
Yes.
But we've got the problem with the weak France.
Yeah.
They've been pushed out of Tyranny at this point. They've got Rome from Austria, but it's not a firm grasp on Rome, given the position. So they've got one unit to protect it. Tunis is looking good, but they've got to devote a lot of units to hold on to Tunis. And the Turks are making a very strong stand for themselves at this point. The Austrian army in Apulia, it was a mystery. In fact, most of Austria's moves were a mystery throughout the game. And they had managed to give up Tyrolia. Germany had managed to give up Tyrolia at that point.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. That's going to be important to allow the Austrian to hold out for a bit longer, I suppose.
Yep. So, because I didn't want Germany to be distracted. We really need them to focus on Warsaw and Austria. And at this point, it was, how can we make sure that we don't have a weak third leg with France in case something bad happens there? Because it was looking very dicey for France.
Yeah.
And France was very, very, very nervous at this point.
And so what do you guys end up doing?
We end up saving France. There you go.
Oh, I do see. It was just like I was thinking it would be.
Yep. So Germans moved into Burgundy. Mm-hmm. I moved into the East Channel. At this point, I was able to use this whole situation with France to say, trust Burgundy. And I got my new army in Edinburgh, which is about to try to help with the Russian situation. But ultimately, one of my main goals as England, in most games that I play, is try to maintain friendship with France if I can, but also to get into the Mediterranean. And because I personally like England and the Mediterranean.
Oh, the Mediterranean's great. It's another playground for all your fleets. So
exactly. And but you have to convince France to be comfortable with you sailing next to their juicy little supply centers if you're not at war with them. But England, in a long-distance war, I find can be very interesting, very exciting, and difficult for the Mediterranean powers to handle.
I can see it. If you're a very strong, very naval England, and England usually is at least very naval.
So that was the move. So I abandoned Belgium at that point. We were still discussing trading Sweden for Belgium, mm-hmm. But I wasn't pushing it very hard because it was obvious that Germany didn't understand why. And the arguments of geographic cohesion just weren't really making their way through.
I guess some players speak different language from each other, or like metaphorically speaking, some people care more about having their centers all close together and easier to defend, and others don't.
Yep, and personally, if I'm playing any of the Western powers, I hate England and Belgium. The game sort of pushes you that direction, but it's not a logical or historical place to be for England.
It's a historical place to be for France and Germany, but not England.
Exactly. So it's often, I've actually played several games where I managed to convince the other players of the three to leave Belgium unoccupied. So I had one game early on where I forget which side I was playing, but we left Belgium unoccupied for the entire game.
Wow.
So, and for a while, I think France and England were bouncing just to reassure each other. But ultimately, we just left it. It just made more sense to leave it empty.
That sounds funny.
Yeah.
Well, I guess good for you that you managed to make that happen. Respected the independence of the Belgian people.
Exactly. So, I like to play those little games. It throws people off balance. I spent one war very early on where I think it was England or France or something, and Austria had disappeared, but we were having a hard time breaking the alliance, and I needed somebody to break the alliance, and so Austria left the game at that point. They only controlled Serbia, but they had no units in it. The unit was someplace else, and no player had come in to take the position. So I was trying to force a war with one of the other powers, with whom I wasn't allied. So I declared Serbia I think it was France. I declared Serbia a French protectorate, even though I was nowhere near Serbia. And but I stood there as a guarantor of Serbian independence, and anyone that attacks Serbia will be at war with France, was the way I stated the entire map.
That's an interesting way to do it.
And it worked, which is even more bizarre. Everybody left poor little red Serbia alone. So, but anyway, at this point, France was praying very hard that Germany wasn't going to betray them, and just trying to get Marseille under control again.
I'm surprised France didn't support Spain into Marseille instead of moving Gascony there.
They were still pretty much on the naval situation, and they were hoping to go back into Piedmont and fight their way across.
Oh, well, yeah, that does make sense. If you're willing to trust that Germany will not walk into Paris.
Yeah. And I think they also had the problem of they needed to do something about, they had to protect their own fleets because the Turks are in Tunis at this point.
Yeah, that does seem kind of threatening.
Yeah. So my game at this point was to try to get into the Mediterranean as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
To try to support, at this point, Russia's making a very strong push against Germany.
Yeah, I see
with
that.
the Austrian support, trying to protect the Germans from the Russians, while at the same time playing nice with the Russians.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and being very usually accused by the Russians of being a traitor.
So this move into the Mediterranean you're trying, is this with France's consent or indifference or what?
At this point, France was. I didn't really give them too much of a choice, but I made it sound like it was France's decision. So at this point, France was, I think, resigned to it, and they'd been playing with me long enough to know that I hadn't lied to anybody yet, and that if I was going to do it, I would do it. But hopefully, I could be their savior against the Turks.
Seems reasonable.
Yep.
All right. And I see you are making further progress in that goal, getting into the Mid-Atlantic.
Yep.
Any minute now, I'm sure I'll see you in Tunis or something.
Didn't quite get that far, but that was the plan if we played longer. But you can see that my trust in Germany was still not solid because I had moved back into Belgium from the North Sea. Especially now that there's no threat from Germany on the North Sea. So I could go back to playing the Let's Make the North Sea a DMZ card.
Which is an interesting thing for you to be doing.
Well, I think at this point, Germany and France knew I was not a liar, and they also knew that England was buttering their bread. So that it was better not to make me an enemy. So I could pretty much do most of what I wanted to do with those two.
Well, I am seeing that you're kind of running this alliance, basically.
At this point, I wish most of my alliances went as well, but this was going England's way.
And in the south, I see that Italy is down to that one center. France and Turkey seem like they might be at an impasse pretty soon. And, Austria and Russia continue to work together. And now Turkey also clearly working with them because Turkey vacates Romania and moves into Galicia. They're all working together, trying to form a line, unity against the Western Triple.
Yep. That's when we start believing that Russia and Turkey were finally working together.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was, what the hell is Turkey doing in Galicia? They're spread all over the map. at
Well,
this point. They've got Trieste, they've got Tunis, they've got Galicia, but they don't have Greece, and they don't have Romania.
well, I think that this is like a. I don't know. I think I like the Turkish position a lot.
It'd be a good place to be
Yeah,
because they got the spinning little Austria in the middle.
yeah. The only thing I don't like about the Turkish position is something that's not to do with the Turkish position, which is that I don't like that the Western Triple exists, because if it didn't, Turkey would be, might be approaching a solo threat pretty soon.
Yep. They were at this point. The penny was dropping with the Eastern Triple, for lack of a better word, and they were starting to see the Western Triple as a reality and the threat that it actually was meant to be. So we were picking up on the fact that the Black Sea is empty and everybody bordering it is unoccupied. So there's this great peace that's descended between Russia and Turkey.
Blessed are the peacemakers.
Evidently, yeah. So it's just a matter of can they pull Austria along with them, which at this point they seem to have turned that corner.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I don't see any fighting likely to happen here. I mean, if Austria does try to fight, I think Turkey and Russia. I mean, it's mainly Turkey, really. Turkey would probably squish Austria pretty quickly.
Yep.
So going forward, I see here that they continue to do reasonably well. Looks to me, except for that they're going to lose. They're going to lose Tunis, but they continue to do reasonably well against you guys right now.
Yeah, this was where the war was really teetering. That I was starting to have worries that we would succeed. France's having tripped a year or so ago made me worry that our strategy was going to work long term, and the fact that our own actions had forced Russia, Austria, and Turkey to coalesce.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. At this point, I think if I was in your shoes, and maybe you're thinking about the end game now, I might be considering how I could position to snap up a couple of German and French centers and call it a day.
I was seriously thinking breaking my own rules about turning on my neighbors without motivation. I had set up several things that I could hopefully use to accuse Germany of being a traitor. But after the whole Sweden-Belgium situation had calmed down, they didn't give me an opportunity. So my only hope then was to either protect them against Russia or to try to sow more discord between Russia and hopefully Turkey. Had the best bet. Russia being the chatty one, managed to hold Turkey in line at this point, and I think they were also preaching the clock to everybody around them that time's running out. We've got to find a way out of this. Russia had made some very, very good moves in the center of the map, and it was a matter of how do we push them back out so that we can eventually threaten Moscow. Because unless I had some sort of help in Warsaw, there's no way that Moscow was going to fall at this point.
No, yeah.
So that left me with my Mediterranean strategy, or hoping that I could get a betrayal. So I was trying very hard to protect France against Germany, and Germany, I think, honestly intended to get out of Burgundy. At this point, they're trapped by the Austrians and the Russians. So we were really just trying to push on any sort of peninsular expansion of the continental powers on the German border.
Yeah, this is tough nut to crack here, this position that the enemy has.
Yeah, and about one more move from now is when Germany starts misusing, in my opinion, I think many people misuse the term stalemate line, where they see it as a position that's not moving at the moment.
Yeah.
But it is not necessarily, to me, a stalemate line means there's almost nothing you can do to change it. And they were never quite there, but they were saying that they had a stalemate line. with Austria.
Yeah, you're right that that's not quite there.
No, but I find many players use stalemate line as a difficult situation, which is not what the word means at all.
You'll fight them on that.
Yeah, I try to correct them.
I think that's for the best, because a lot of players do misuse that idea.
There's a lot of shorthand. Juggernaut is another one which people misuse all the time.
Oh, how do they misuse that?
I find it is often just any sort of relationship between Turkey and Russia, usually. Whereas, to me, Juggernaut is pretty strong alliance and coordination with initially Austria as its target.
Yes, I would say so too.
Yeah. So I've seen people declare Juggernaut in 1901, which it ain't. I mean, maybe their vision for the future, but it's not Juggernaut at that point. Yeah. So at this point, I'm in North Africa, so I'm in a better position to help France rebuild. But we still have a very strong Turkish navy, and there's not a lot of games where you see Turkey being primarily a naval force at this point in the game. But here they are.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That is funny. Turkey's so strong in the navy here.
Yep, and especially with the outlier up there in Galicia.
Oh yeah. I see here that Turkey loses a bit of ground thanks to you and France working in combination.
Yep. And Italy falls at this point.
Yep. Austria, who had supported Italy previously in Venice, because I think Austria wanted to use Italy to help hold the line. Austria stabs him.
Yep. Italy is in high cry mode at that point, but there's nothing anyone can do about that. So we'd even talked about France supporting Italy, but once they redeveloped. But France still hadn't forgiven the whole Marseille situation, which was the beginning of almost the fall of France, if this is going on, I think. Yeah. But at this point, we are starting to fight over inches, not feet, in the war. So we pretty much blocked Austrian expansion in the north. Russia's running out of extra units to throw at us. But at the same point, I can't move into Moscow until Warsaw falls.
I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
No, not with Silesia. So our next move is we have to get rid of Silesia, which is what we're talking about. And at this point, I had already moved out of Belgium again, in case I needed to, if I was able to build in Edinburgh, I needed a fleet back in the North Sea to convoy myself over to Scandinavia again. But I was also having ultimately an unsuccessful conversation with France about what to do post-Tunis. My position was, both in an honest way, but also in a manipulative way, where is the best place for the alliance as an alliance to build a unit? Is it in France or is it in England? Which wasn't the strongest of arguments to have, given the position of the units on the board. But I thought I might manage to take Tunis off their hands at that point and be a stronger force in the Mediterranean, especially with me having a fleet in the Mid-Atlantic as well as North Africa. But France ultimately came down on the side of parity, which is generally a strong argument as well, especially early in the war. Yeah. And it was that was how we started off with the two builds for the three parties to begin with, was all three of us, France, joining in preaching parity. Yeah,
which is especially, I think, maybe a more powerful argument for France to make now, because in 1901, there's no particular reason why England should get two builds, and France could certainly potentially get three.
Yep, they rode on that one pretty easy at the beginning of the war, which made me happy, obviously. There's nothing worse than a one-build England at the beginning of the war.
It happens so often.
It happens very often. And like I said before, I really wish Belgium wasn't the easy target that it is. Denmark is much harder to talk your way into, I find, which is the alternative. And Holland is almost impossible to talk yourself into. But I've managed to do that in other wars, where England starts off in Holland or Denmark instead of Belgium, but it takes a lot of conniving.
I would imagine so. As a straightforward, open book sort of person myself, I can't imagine talking my way into Holland. But I mean, well done for you if you've done that as England.
That's generally on the understanding that this will be a German-English war against France.
Makes sense.
And so getting the Germans more strongly into Belgium rather than Holland helps the Germans think that they can get into Picardy as well as Burgundy in 1902.
I see the reasoning. Yeah.
But you have to have that sort of a circumstance. You can't really do it in a three-way as easily. That makes the French very, very nervous to have the Germans and the English changing position in the Low Countries.
Yeah, I would think it would make both of them nervous, really, to have Germany too close to France and to have an English unit next to the German home centers.
Yeah, you pretty much have to use that as a guarantor of peace and see if they're foolish enough to fall for it. But that's not the way it was. So anyway, Burgundy is unoccupied again, but not under threat as it was when we had the Germans in Ruhr and in Burgundy. So I was still nervous enough about Germany that I wanted Ruhr empty and Holland empty. And it finds something to do with the two useless German fleets.
Yeah.
And we talked about even moving them to a position where we'd get one of them destroyed. But the situation just never worked out that way.
That's a shame, because they really are useless right now.
No, we needed a continental force for Germany if we're going to win this thing. So, and this is where, as I said before, Germany was really talking about stalemate lines at this point, and they were starting to be close to correct in their usage at that point.
Yeah, I think so, because I think with this positioning, if Austria or Turkey just put a unit in Bohemia, then I think the position is starting to look pretty unbreakable.
Yeah.
In fact, I would imagine that would be the next thing they do, because there's nothing to stop them doing that now.
I think you are probably correct, but we're within minutes of the end of the game at this point as well. Not sure what year we are.
I'm not quite sure either. Oh, that was actually the final position.
That was it? Okay. That was where everybody just had an open conversation. What can we do? And the clock is ticking. And I think everyone realized at this point that they were not going to improve their positions in the tournament. So tournament strategy took over regular diplomacy strategy at this point.
Who was most strongly pushing for the draw right now? I'm really curious, because I think that there's only one person there's only one person who I think, there are a couple of people whose positions are probably going to decline if the game continued.
Yep.
Russia's position would probably have become unstable at some point if Austria and Turkey were trying to snatch a few extra dots.
Yep. Yeah, Russia was a big proponent of this. England was not a strong proponent. But I got outvoted pretty much, and the logic was just the way it was. It was clear that the Western Triple was not going to split. I think that was pretty clear to just about everybody, because I've been preaching too much my honesty, the honest playing method of diplomacy, and people were believing me. But and as a result of the strong Western Triple, the Eastern Bloc had pulled together in an honest way now. So I think it had teetered very, very much until the last year or so. But at this point, it is a sink or swim strategy for the Eastern powers. So Russia, I think, had managed to convince both Turkey and Austria to sign on, was convinced that neither was going to turn on each other or on Russia. And so this the border that we have in, once you're in the Tyrrhenian or the Ionian, that is a very hard line to cross, I find. And you really have to have overwhelming numerical superiority to break across that line.
Yeah.
And if you've got too many armies sitting on the Italian peninsula, it can just sit there forever. So, because you just can't make it teeter, and North Africa and some of these others are so far away from the border that they can't really influence it except to support the frontline units. So they can't really do it. You have to really get into Tuscany or Apulia to help switch that over. Turkey, at this point, it was impossible for me to move against Russia. The fleets were finally starting to pay off for Germany because the support in the Baltic couldn't be attacked by anybody because Russia had no fleets. So that sort of helped them. Burgundy was no longer threatening to France, so it meant France was there, but its only position could be to safeguard Munich. And with having moved the fleet into the Baltic and the army into Kiel, it meant that the German home centers were secure. They could be protected now. So France had its homeland. Nothing really could tip without the Turks and the Austrians turning on each other. And they decided they weren't going to do so. So at this point, I think we had 2 years left, but we all decided to call it a day.
Yeah, I believe you did have 2 years left. I saw the game ended in 1907. I was a little surprised because, clearly there could have been a little more play here if you guys wanted to, but I think it makes sense that the surviving players were satisfied with this.
Yep. Part of it's very definitely my fault by having my little internal rules that I won't turn on an ally without a reason to do so. I could have attacked France very easily. I could have attacked Germany very easily, but unfortunately they never gave me a reason to do so.
Yeah, those that sounds like those internal rules sound like they could be a real pain for you sometimes.
Yeah, so I've been, we improve and we learn from our mistakes and our weaknesses. So I'm getting better at not making promises.
Well, that's something we could all stand to improve at, I suppose.
Yeah, I find the easiest trap to fall into is, especially in a tournament, and obviously the psychology for a tournament is very different from the psychology for a regular game, is there's always that pressure to declare an alliance at the beginning. And resisting that, especially in a regular game, is something that I'm trying to get better at. Because I've been burned too often by the other side trying to backstab me in an alliance. And you fall into your own traps if you believe people. So try to make as much distance between myself and my supposed friends. Burgundy is generally a disaster anytime somebody gets in there other than France. And there's several other dominoes that can just cause total havoc for the various players around the board, as you very, very well know.
That is true. Just like if somebody gets into North Sea, England's not going to be happy about that if it's not England.
Exactly the example I was just thinking of. Yep. And it's also how the psychology changes here if you're playing Build Anywhere versus the homeland priority that we have in the traditional game.
Yeah. Well, this was an interesting game. It's interesting how differently you thought about it because it was a tournament game.
It changes the play style. At least it does for me in a very great way. And one suggestion I have is of the major tournaments that go on every year, it would be great to have one of them start mid-year. This particular year, just to luck of the draw, because I was playing in, I think, just 2 or 3 major tournaments that are going on, and just because of regular gameplay. In January and February, I had 4 games going on simultaneously, which I don't like to do. I like to have 2, maybe 3 at the most. And that ended up being a bit of a distraction for this game as well. But I managed to, luckily my work life was such that I could devote the time to it that I needed to. But that's a lot of time to play in front of the computer screen if you're playing 4 powers at once. Whereas if one of the tournaments would start later in the year, I think there's less of a chance of that happening.
I think that's a good point, and hopefully the Play Diplomacy folks who organize tournaments will, hear this and take your recommendation. Well, do you have any last thoughts you want to share about this game?
No, it was a very interesting game. Like I say, I would really love to get some of the input from the other players eventually.
Oh, yeah.
Russia was incredibly interesting. They're very proactive. I felt bad that we couldn't ally. I think we could have allied very, very well if the first year had started differently. And it was a shame that they were late to the game. They had some sort of distraction, travel, or something that was going on. But a very interesting player. And I look forward to playing him again sometime. I think everybody was very, very good.
Seems that way to me. Like, no one made any really terrible mistakes. Everyone had kind of a decent plan. Even when Germany was thinking about the possibility of you betraying him or him betraying you, there was still clearly a good groundwork laid there with trying to make a pact with Russia and keeping units back in case you betrayed them. So I thought it seemed like a pretty well thought out game on all sides here. I mean, you can tell that most of the players were probably experienced.
Yeah, France might have been a little bit less experienced. But she did very, very well, and recovered very well from the Italian incursion into Marseille. I think if Turkey was just spectacular in their own way, and I think if this had been a normal game where you have strong players and weak players, experienced players and less experienced players, any of these people could have done very, very well. So I think we were pretty evenly matched. As a result, we ended up with a draw. So,
yeah. And each of the Western powers, at the end, is equal in strength to the others.
Pretty much. That wasn't the intention necessarily, but that's the way it worked out.
You ended up at parity.
Yep. The logic of the Western triple is so logical that I've been shocked a couple of times to be involved in Western triple and have one of the players stab. Like on the third or fourth year.
To be honest, I have played in so many games where the Western triple has been attempted or partially executed, and it's my feeling that the norm is for one of the players to stab.
Yep. Well, it's that I think it comes down to how the website itself explains the game. And I think the psychology that's gone into it. It's become, in many ways, a game of liars, which I don't think it needs to be. I probably play straight too far on the other side of the line, and I'm trying to change that, as I say. But I think people think that the whole point of the game is to backstab, which it isn't. That's not the way the game was played originally. And back when Kissinger was playing it, I doubt if he was quite that aggressive, especially if he was playing face to face with people that he would have to do business with later. The logic is there. And so it always surprises me with people who come off initially as being fairly illogical, then stab, especially if they stab stupidly. But it takes all kinds.
Yeah, I think stabbing stupidly is one thing that all of us who have done it probably regret having done it. But when you stab intelligently, it's such a sweet thing.
Oh yeah.
Hard to resist.
No, I generally stab with motivation. I have these rules, but one of them is one lie and you're out. One betrayal and you're out. I can lie to you any time after that. So you've earned it. But when you can do it well, I had somehow I get, when I play Turkey, I always have very aggressive Austrians. Mm-hmm. And I've been in several games where the Austrians were just horrible, horrible, horrible people. And I managed one time to pretend to be their friend, even though I had already written them off my list, and managed to get them to move everything up to the Italian and the German borders. And I think I ended up taking Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece at one point with my stab, and which crippled them. It was great. So I was proud of that one.
Yeah, that's a good stab.
So otherwise, no, it was a very good game. I'd like to see some of the insights from some of the other people. And because Russia, if they created the Eastern Bloc, did a very good job of it. Because there were several times when they could have been just blown off the map, which was my secret hope as England, that the only way I was going to be able to move past St. Petersburg, even with Livonia, I needed some sort of attraction pulling the Russians farther south for me to make any progress there. But here they are with the final position. Everything is up in the north, and there's not entire Black Sea basin is unoccupied.
Yeah. This. Well, I guess you guys were very motivational for the Eastern Bloc.
Well, we did that at least.
It's courtesy of the Western Triple.
Yeah. No, it's if France hadn't tripped over itself, I think if Austria had been less aggressive to Italy, we probably could have ended this with a more lopsided draw at the end. I don't think we would have made it all the way to Turkey by 1909, but we would have at least been past Italy instead of on Italy's western borders.
Yeah, you might be right. Well, thank you for giving your reflections on this game. I hope you enjoyed this diplomacy commentary after action report. And if you liked it, you know what to do. Like and subscribe and check out my blog and my Patreon or Ko-Fi. I should note the people whose names now appear on screen are those without whom this channel and its growth, as it currently exists, might not be possible. So they have my thanks. And until next time, Florida Man out.